Mock Draft Monday on a Tuesday this week, because on Monday the NBA had its tiebreakers for NBA draft positioning for the 2025 NBA draft. We learned a lot. I'm going to cover that here quickly, but we got Mock Draft Monday on a Tuesday before we got GTA 6. What the heck's going on? Anyway, I hope you guys do enjoy the video today as usual. What I do want to talk about here, Phoenix, this Suns pick, they did win the tiebreaker over Portland, so now they are technically prioritized over Portland in terms of the NBA draft odds and their draft floor. Technically, Dallas won the tiebreaker over Chicago. And then this pick here, Sacramento, technically won the tiebreaker over Atlanta. But that actually, funny enough, benefits Atlanta as they own Sacramento's pick. And Atlanta owes its pick to San Antonio. So obviously the Rockets are huge winners here, having their pick at number 9 technically now via Phoenix. The Spurs at number 14 after the Hawks missed the play-in. And then, of course, the Kings here sending their pick if it's 13 or 14 to Atlanta. So, as I promised last week, we are going to do a lottery simulation as well, especially at this point of the process. So let's sim that lottery now. The Philadelphia 76ers jump up to pick number 1 in the sweepstakes for Cooper Flagg. New Orleans jumps up to number 2. The Toronto Raptors fly up into the top 4 at number 3. And lo and behold, there's the San Antonio Spurs. A lot of comments saying the Spurs are going to get a top 4 pick this year. This is a rough lottery simulation for some of the worst teams in the league. Utah and Washington and Charlotte, the 3 worst records in the league, all fall out of the top 4 despite having roughly 50-50 odds to have a top 4 pick in this year's draft. Wow. Let's jump over now to that actual mock draft portion here. All right, here we are now with the actual mock draft, and what a shakeup that lottery simulation was. And now first overall on the clock here are the Philadelphia 76ers, and really there's not any questions to be asked other than what's Joel Embiid's future with the Philadelphia 76ers at this point. It would be a very interesting crossroads for them to determine if they do end up winning the NBA draft lottery. Remember, this pick is top 6 protected as well, which could theoretically be sent out to Oklahoma City if it falls down to pick number 7, but no surprises here to start off the mock draft. The Philadelphia 76ers select superstar Cooper Flagg out of Duke. And every single week, I think about, what position do I want to list him at? He's going to defend forwards, can defend some guards, wings. He's going to play point guard a little bit. He'll handle the basketball. He'll run pick and rolls. He'll be a screen setter. He might play small ball 5 on occasion, even if a team wants to be very aggressive with him and put shooting and spacing around him. There's a lot of ways to win with Cooper Flagg, and I think putting him into the Philadelphia 76ers roster is going to be such an interesting landing spot for him because of their existing talent. We already mentioned Joel Embiid. Obviously, Paul George looking to have a bounce-back season next year as well. But then you look at their backcourt, Jared McCain, Tyrese Maxey, 2 players who, with Cooper Flagg added into the mix, can be very, very productive off-ball players. And I think Maxey's quickness downhill, McCain's shooting ability and relocation tools would be very, very good fits next to Cooper Flagg. We've already seen him thrive at the college game and the high school game with other talented pieces around him. You think about how good certain guys like Liam McNeely or Knueppel have been playing off of Cooper Flagg. I think that would be very beneficial for Jared McCain there in Philadelphia. Obviously, the Joel Embiid, Cooper Flagg fit would be very unique, very fun, very entertaining. They are both very great individually gifted players, but it might minimize Cooper Flagg early in his career just a little bit on the offensive end of the floor. You think about Embiid, the areas of the floor he occupies, how often he has the basketball in his hands as a center. And while I do think, obviously, the appeal could be for Philadelphia to keep their entire core team together and just try and win with Cooper Flagg immediately, something that he is ready to do, ready to, in my opinion, contribute for an NBA caliber, playoff caliber team. I do think Cooper Flagg, though, this might not be the best immediate landing spot for him to develop offensively and further his game. I do think there's work for him to do when it comes to his handle and kind of taking those next steps as a future NBA superstar. But for the 76ers, it would be very fun to watch him play playoff basketball very early on in his career. So kind of a catch-22 here, but I do think the Sixers, if they win the lottery, they get the first overall pick, which there's a real chance that this very well could happen on NBA Draft Lottery Night, May 12th. Well, Cooper Flagg to Philadelphia would be quite the turn of events from where we thought this team was going to be last July when they signed Paul George to put with Maxey, to put with Joel Embiid. What a crazy turn of events. Moving on to pick number 2, we have the New Orleans Pelicans here. New Orleans moving up in the lottery here in this simulation. Very, very important for them, and I do think being a top 1 or 2 pick is extremely valuable in this year's draft class, especially for my own independent individual board. Obviously, that's not what these mock drafts are based upon, but I am somewhat in line with consensus on the top 2 prospects in this draft with Cooper Flagg and at second overall, Dylan Harper to the New Orleans Pelicans. And the reason I think Dylan Harper to New Orleans is such a great situation for the Pelicans, what they really badly need is someone who is very, very adept at handling the basketball, making live reads with the ball in his hand, something that I do think, even though DeJounte Murray is a quality guard, obviously coming off that Achilles tear, we don't really know what he's going to look like, how healthy he's going to be. I think Dylan Harper becomes the face of the franchise long-term in the backcourt. Obviously, still have Zion Williamson, one of the highest double rates in the NBA when it comes to the attention he draws. And obviously, when he is on the floor, he is one of the best 15, 20 basketball players on planet Earth. So, New Orleans does have some existing talent. Obviously, they did trade away Brandon Ingram. They still have CJ McCollum, who's going into the last year of his deal. They have this interesting infrastructure of some veteran talent, some younger talent as well that they can surround Dylan Harper with. Trey Murphy's another name that comes to mind as a very, very big-time breakout star over the last 3-4 months. Obviously, I've been talking about Trey Murphy for a lot longer than that. But I do think for New Orleans specifically, Dylan Harper, you think about the screen and roll game that he could possess with Zion. Harper's very adept at splitting in the pick and roll, scoring off of dribble pull-ups, and a very good rim finisher as well. So there is some redundancy here a little bit for New Orleans, just given the fact they do have DeJounte Murray and they already have one of the best rim finishers in the game in Zion Williamson. But talent speaks, especially in the NBA, and I think that for New Orleans specifically, a franchise that is constantly, desperately, incessantly chasing after talent and trying to build a winner, Dylan Harper, even though he didn't do a ton of winning his first year at Rutgers, was the best player on the Scarlet Knights by a large margin. And right now at this point in the draft process, I feel very comfortable saying that he will return top 2, maybe top 3 results when it comes to 15 years from now. We look back on this draft, I think Dylan Harper is going to be a very, very strong pick here in the top 2 of this year's draft class. Moving on to pick number 3, the Toronto Raptors. Remember, they moved up in this lottery simulation as well. We have a whole brand new, fresh top 4. Not sure that's exactly going to happen on draft night, but that's what happened here in the lottery sim. And the Toronto Raptors at this spot, obviously a team that we've talked about with big men, we've talked about with a variety of different pieces. There's a lot of ways they can go, but Toronto, down the stretch of this season specifically, became a defense-first team, a team that had a very strong defensive infrastructure. Now you think about going into next year, what they hopefully can be offensively with Brandon Ingram being one of their primary offensive creators, someone who will definitely help them out big time on the offensive end of the floor. And now the ability to add a top 3 pick in the 2025 draft as well. This is a prime opportunity for the Raptors to really round out their rotation, continue fleshing out the depth of their roster specifically, and improving their defense even further with this selection as they select guard VJ Edgecombe out of Baylor, someone who had a very, very fun freshman season. Not always the most productive, but did average about 15 points per game this past year for the Baylor Bears. And I think specifically when you look at what he's going to be successful at in the NBA, I think his point of attack defense and physical gifts and tools that he possesses are really what stand out to me that make him an intriguing upside bet in the top 5 of the 2025 NBA draft class. Now, when it comes to your traditional dribble, pass, shoot skills, there is a little bit left to be desired here at this point of the process, in my opinion, for someone like VJ Edgecombe, who only shot 43.6% from the floor, shot a flat 50% on 2-pointers, and only 34% on threes. However, I thought there was an encouraging amount of 3-point volume as he shot about 4.5 3-pointers a game this past year for a 40.2% 3-point attempt rate, which is pretty darn good. Especially, I think, considering where I was expecting him to be going into his freshman season. I thought he did shoot more and produce decently for what I was kind of expecting before his freshman season. Shot 78% from the line. I know a lot of people look at that free throw number and use that as the end-all be-all indicator for shooting success moving forward. While I do think there is obvious positives you can draw from shooting free throws and shooting them at a high clip, it is really not the exact same thing. I don't think there's really any good telltale stat or analytic to suggest 3-point shooting other than their 3-point success rate and volume. And I think, Edgecombe, there was some positives in terms of the volume. The success rate, a little hit or miss at times this year. But this guy is very, very athletic. The tools, the traits, the physical gifts that he possesses are very unique in this year's draft class, specifically for his position as a backcourt player. Someone who I think for Toronto, next to Emmanuel Quickley, as a guard spelling off of Brandon Ingram and Scotty Barnes, gives the Raptors this really unique point of attack defending option who can also function in a variety of ways defensively, not guarding the basketball, which is really valuable. And then also in transition, he's going to be an absolute blur and someone who I think could help Toronto quite a bit, even as a true rookie next season. Moving on to pick number 4. The San Antonio Spurs are here, and Spurs fans are rejoicing. This is going to be a mock draft where I do not mock Knueppel to the San Antonio Spurs. Oh my goodness. What a change of events, right? But if they do move up into the top 4, all things, considered, being completely transparent here, I would love for the Spurs to trade this pick. The Spurs have taken this very smart long-term approach about stacking assets and putting together pieces and kind of prioritizing long-term flexibility around Victor Wembanyama. We've already seen that pay off a bit, getting De'Aaron Fox. The Spurs could either continue to do that in a very big way here, trading away pick 4. They could get, I'm sure, a ton of future assets, a collection of future picks for sure. This is a top 4 pick. Or they could package this into a deal for a certified star caliber player. Someone like Lauri Markkanen in Utah. Maybe if they went the Kevin Durant route, this is like the beginning, huge fundamental core piece of that kind of trade if they want to go that way. I'm not suggesting they go for Kevin Durant. I would not do that, but possibility. Devin Booker, another name obviously that they could consider. You have Devin Vassell. You have all these contracts, right, that you could throw into some of these deals to get something done. Pick 4 would be a really good trade chip for them. But in this mock draft with no trades, what I do think the Spurs would do here at this spot is select wing Ace Bailey from Rutgers, and they would swing big time on the physical gifts, athletic tools, shot-making talent, and hope that the Spurs way just rubs off onto Ace Bailey, where all of a sudden the connectivity, the extra passing, all of their little training camp drills that they put their players through year in, year out, would just over time seep into the player DNA that Ace Bailey possesses. And I do think San Antonio would be a tremendous landing spot for him when it comes to the way that they go about winning, the way that they go about player development, and the importance and value they place on making the extra pass and playing within their team context and system. And then obviously for Ace Bailey too, putting him with someone like Victor Wembanyama, who's extremely coordinated, is an elite lob threat, someone who's just flat out bigger than everyone else on the NBA court. That doesn't hurt either when it comes to trying to maximize Ace Bailey's possible playmaking upside, which right now does seem a little bleak. I think the Spurs are a very unique landing spot for him, given what they already have on their roster. They have, a primary creator in Wembanyama. They have another primary creator in De'Aaron Fox. Ace Bailey could slot into this off-the-catch type of player. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of need for development yet. He is not a good off-the-catch player at this point in time, in my opinion. Now, there are tools there. Again, we've talked at length this draft cycle about the shot-making talent. I still have significant concerns with the footwork and the overall functional play strength that he has to unlock those things at the NBA game. I do think when it comes to the way he'll be defended, teams are going to get physical with him. Teams are going to try and crowd him, really eliminate his ability to handle the rock. I think he's going to be pretty reliant on that spin move and early dribble pickups, which means instead of getting to a 13, 14-foot pull-up jump shot, you're getting to an 18, 19-foot pull-up jump shot. As your efficiency drops by even 2, 3, 4% the further away from the hoop you are, the less effective that is for NBA offense, specifically when you're playing around guys like Wembanyama, De'Aaron Fox. There's not a lot of leash to, hey, yeah, Ace Bailey, go develop your game and shoot a whole bunch of 19, 20-footers. We don't really care about winning. The Spurs are going to want to start winning, which is why I think trading this pick is the most sensible thing to do. But Ace Bailey, someone who was a projected top 2, maybe top 3 pick coming into this draft cycle, obviously someone who is still going to warrant a top half of the lottery selection. More than likely, the Spurs at 4 do seem like kind of a weird landing spot, but given there's no mock trades in this mock draft, Ace Bailey at 4 to San Antonio is, I think, fairly sensible. Moving on to pick number 5, the Utah Jazz here now, who did have the worst record in the NBA. They had the number 1 pick in my most recent mock draft last Monday, and now here on this Tuesday, I have the Utah Jazz at pick number 5, selecting wing Trey Johnson out of Texas, one of the more successful three-point shooters in college basketball this past season, and he did it on a very high degree of difficulty, flying off of off-ball screens, catching and firing. One of my favorite things about Trey Johnson as a draft prospect is watching him set his feet while off of movement or off the dribble and finding that center of balance to effectively create rhythm and routine in his looks. And that's one of the things that I think for Utah specifically could be really valuable around this young core nucleus that they have. Obviously, a lot of draft and development strategy here for Utah. They took a project player in Cody Williams last year, someone who I do think has a bright future ahead of him, but had a very, very bad rookie season, one that he's going to need a lot of room and a lot of time for growth yet. You look at Isaiah Collier, obviously racked up a ton of assists, but defensively was really, really abysmal, honestly, as a rookie, as you could expect. Kyle Filipowski flashed big time for this Utah Jazz team as a rookie. So there's some of these young pieces already in place. They have some playmaking upside for sure. They obviously have Lauri Markkanen, a big-time core contributor for them moving forward. Walker Kessler, who is a big-time rim-to-rim big man. So they have some of the pieces in place that I think could benefit Trey Johnson. And I think Trey Johnson benefits those young pieces that they already have, giving them someone with real shooting gravity, scoring upside. Now, he's not a good inside-the-arc scorer, good inside-the-arc finisher, and I think a lot of that relies on his contact avoidance and specifically looking for jump shots rather than finishes at the rim constantly. But for a team like Utah, who already has, a downhill threat in Isaiah Collier, has someone in Walker Kessler who can be a very adept off-ball screener for him, Trey Johnson landing in Utah, there's a ton of functionality here that I think would fit pretty well for Will Hardy and the Jazz. Moving on to pick number 6, the Washington Wizards here now at this spot. And the Wizards, with Alex Sarr being snubbed from the Rookie of the Year finalist ballot, maybe they'll come into next year with a little bit of fire lit underneath them. Obviously, they did have the second worst record in the NBA this past year. The Wizards are a ways away yet from being a very good team, but they have kind of this blank canvas in front of them where, yes, they've taken some young players already. Bilal Coulibaly, the first pick from the Michael Winger, Will Dawkins era of DC basketball. And then you look at this past draft. They traded Denny Avdi out. They ended up with 3 first-round picks in the 2024 NBA draft class where they took Alex Sarr. They took, obviously, Bub Carrington and then Keyshawn George in that order. I think the Wizards, they have some pieces in place. And now there's a real question about how they want to continue building. Alex Sarr, we saw him predominantly succeed as the 5, but it doesn't mean that he can't exist next to another front court member. It just has to be a different front court player than a Jonas Valanciunas. It has to be someone who's probably a little bit more mobile, a little bit more skilled offensively, and I think the Wizards have that option here at 6th overall. I have the Washington Wizards here selecting big man Derik Queen out of Maryland, and some Wizards fans are smiling big time right here. Staying in the DMV area, Derik Queen, I think, would be a huge hit for the Washington Wizards. Boasts an incredible free throw rate, got to the line a ton for Maryland, and succeeded playing next to another big man in Julian Reese for the Maryland Terrapins this past year. You think back to his huge game winner in the NCAA tournament. Derik Queen's a very good basketball player. Now, he is a slightly older freshman, already over 20 years old. So while he is a true freshman, you're not thinking about this 18 and a half, 19-year-old kid like you're getting with Cooper Flagg, for example. Obviously for the Wizards, falling down to pick 6 is pretty unfortunate for them. But it doesn't mean they can't get a good player. In fact, I think they're getting a very, very good player here in Derik Queen, and building a front court that is really, really fun. Derik Queen has shown the ability to switch out into space a bit in his lone season with the Terrapins. Pretty comfortable moving his feet out on the perimeter, and obviously has the length to challenge shots outside of the arc as well and pull up jump shots, while also at times for Maryland being their anchor in the center of a zone or being their primary helper. You think back to his very first Maryland game, a 2020 game, gets on the glass at a respectable rate. This is the type of player that's a very fun fit with Alex Sarr. I could even see them running a ton of 45 action with either Sarr or Queen handling the basketball in those plays. And you think about the way that the game is played today, some of the best teams in the NBA, the Oklahoma City Thunder with 2 big men. You think to Minnesota last year with Towns and Gobert, even to an extent this year with Randall and Gobert. Obviously, Randall's a big, strong, physical forward. Having 2 bigs is a valuable tool in today's game. The Cavaliers have dominated the Eastern Conference with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen this year. So could Derik Queen and Alex Sarr be the front court of the future for the Washington Wizards? I definitely think the upside is there for them to warrant this kind of selection in the top 10. If the Wizards do fall down in the draft lottery all the way down to 6, which is the lowest they can possibly pick, this is still a pretty good long-term outcome for them, and one that I think could long-term fit really, really well next to Alex Sarr and Derik Queen, giving you a ton of matchup versatility, added size, better rebounding, and not at the expense of your playmaking, since Sarr and Queen are both developing face-up front court players who can take your man off the bounce, make live reads off the dribble, and excel in those kinds of fashions. Moving on to pick number 7, the Charlotte Hornets here now. At this spot of the draft, again, this team had the 3rd best odds coming into the draft lottery, fall all the way down to the lowest possible pick they could have at pick number 7. Not a good situation for Charlotte, and I think this team is still a ways away from really being a good NBA team, a team that can win a good number of NBA games in a regular season. But this pick is really instrumental for them, and I have them 7th overall here, selecting center Khaman Maluach from Duke. He stays there in North Carolina, and I think this is a long-term pick. This is not a selection that will help them in the next year and a half or 2 years. Obviously, they do have Mark Williams still at this point. We'll see what his future looks like in Charlotte after they did agree to trade him this past February to the Lakers, before that trade was ultimately rescinded by Los Angeles due to a failed physical. The Charlotte Hornets at this spot with Khaman Maluach, while it's not clear if he would be a day 1 starter for them or not, depending on what happens with Mark Williams, he certainly would be an upgrade for them when it comes to rim protection, screening, and rolling and touch at the rim as a lob threat. And I think this is a very good long-term fit next to LaMelo Ball offensively, but I do think defensively Charlotte would have a lot of work to do before you could really see the benefit of Khaman Maluach on that end of the floor. I think if you watch Duke Blue Devils games and you go back to what this freshman season looked like for Maluach specifically, Duke's defense was at its best with Maluach on the floor, but part of the reason that was the collection of defenders that Duke already had. You think about Sion James, you think about the work Tyrese Proctor did to grow as a defender this year. Cooper Flagg, obviously the headliner of the 2025 draft class. Knueppel's no slouch defensively and a pretty good team defender, especially at the college game. All of those pieces and players around Maluach allowed his rim protection to really step up a notch, because instead of straight line drives and blow-bys and constant 1-on or 2-on-1 attacks at the rim, Maluach was playing as a true help defender without having to constantly overhelp, early rotate because of straight line drives. And I think Charlotte right now, they surrender a lot of straight line drives. That's, one of the biggest hiccups of LaMelo Ball as a player. He is not a good point of attack defender at all. He is actually one of the worst, in my opinion, in the entire league at this point of his career. Now, I do think there's still room for him to grow and develop, and if you put the right pieces around him, can you maximize him defensively a bit better? I for sure think that. So this is not a pick that's going to all of a sudden, even though it's a huge need for Charlotte long term and does help them a lot in some areas, this doesn't solve everything. And I think there would be some real growing pains with Maluach if you're expecting to play 25 to 30 minutes a night on given nights, because there's going to be a huge adaptation, not only going from the college game to the NBA game, but going from one of the best collection of talent defensively in the college game at Duke to one of the worst collections of defensive talent in the NBA for the Charlotte Hornets. So I do think Maluach would have a real uphill battle in front of him to enact his impact he had in the college game, but this is still a player who fits long-term offensively off of LaMelo Ball. His screen setting on day one can be really, really good next to Brandon Miller, and I do think for Charlotte it is still a smart long-term selection, but there's more work to be done for the Hornets. Pick number 8, we're on to the Brooklyn Nets here now, and Brooklyn having 4 first-round picks in this year's draft. Pick 8 becomes one of the most important for them, and I think one thing that's really lacking long-term on this current Nets roster is the guy you think could be a primary or at very worst a secondary initiation bet. Someone you think, okay, this is someone who's going to handle the basketball for us a ton, create for us in the pick and roll, create for us off of dribble handoffs, and do all of these little things very, very well. In past mock drafts, I've obviously looked at the big man spot for the Nets quite a bit with either Derik Queen or Khaman Maluach. Both of them are off the board here, though. So I do have the Brooklyn Nets 8th overall selecting guard Kasparas Jakucionis from Illinois, someone whose draft range maybe even a little bit lower than this number 8 spot. But I think if the Nets do fall down to number 8, this is a sensible selection. And one thing I really love about Jakucionis here for Brooklyn in Jordi Fernandez's offense, which is handoff, not reliant, but handoff centric at times. Jakucionis does a lot of little things really well, and one of the things I really love about him is his readiness to play off the catch and his decisiveness in those moments. He is someone who, it just feels like he's comfortable going full speed. He's comfortable playing downhill at a pace that makes him a threat when he first catches the ball, when he first gets the ball. And I think every action he's ran off of from this past year at Illinois, I just see him doing that with huge motor, someone who is playing the game at the right pace that he's meant to be playing it at. He doesn't take possessions off. He's not lazy about, hey, I have to cut here, or this part of the play I'm supposed to do that. He's not lazy about any of that stuff. And I think even though that sounds like such a small little minute detail, I do think that's really important. And specifically for Brooklyn in the way that if he's playing off the ball a little bit more, playing off of handoffs, triggering into actions, there's going to be a lot of value here. And the nice thing for Brooklyn, they have 4 picks. They're going to be able to get players who fit around Jakucionis moving forward. They're also not really locked into Jakucionis just being their 1A guy, because I do think Jakucionis as a secondary ball handler might return even better results than what a lot of people are projecting right now. Because at Illinois, he was kind of the guy, and playing off of Collin Ball as well, playing off of Will Riley just doesn't return the same results for a college offense. So I felt like the Fighting Illini were kind of stuck where when Jakucionis didn't have the ball in their hands, I didn't trust their process as much. So I think for Brooklyn moving forward, if you do get a player who ultimately becomes a better processor, a better offensive 1A player next to Jakucionis, there's ways for him to still be a successful off-ball player where you kind of toggle between the two of them, spam middle pick and roll, spam, side ball screens, whatever you want to do with Jakucionis and player X, Y, or Z, whoever that is in the future of the Brooklyn Nets organization. Jakucionis can be a good building block one way or another. Moving on to pick number 9, the Houston Rockets here. Of course, this was one of those tiebreaker teams, and the Rockets having the 9th pick now, more than likely, we'll see what happens with the lottery, right? They could move down, possibly, but they very well could move up into that top 4 too. The Rockets are very well poised to trade this pick, something I think, like I talked about with San Antonio, would be very wise for the Rockets to do if it is an upside long-term creation bet, trading for someone like Devin Booker or Giannis Antetokounmpo. I hope it's not Kevin Durant. Again, it should not be Kevin Durant, but nonetheless, Houston very well could trade this pick, but again, no mock trades in this video. The Houston Rockets, 9th overall, I do have selecting guard Knueppel out of Duke, and I think if you look at what Houston's really struggled with, and I thought it was very apparent in their Game 1 against the Golden State Warriors, the lack of spacing, the lack of gravity shooting, the lack of off-ball movement out on the perimeter around the arc rather than inside of it. Those are some of the biggest missing traits for Houston right now. And how good would it be next year to go in not only with Reed Sheppard, acquiring a larger dose of minutes for this team, but also factoring in someone like Knueppel as well, where while yes, the minutes can be somewhat shaky at times for who's going to get what minutes and how big of a role someone's going to have, Knueppel, Reed Sheppard, those two guys immediately and drastically changed this team's three-point shooting gravity. They changed the success rate and the amount of volume that this team is going to shoot threes, and with Fred VanVleet's future in Houston uncertain, Jalen Green, obviously, if they do make some big kind of trade, Jalen Green would very likely be a part of that. This pick, if they do still have it, implementing more Reed Sheppard, adding in a Knueppel would be really, really, really good for Houston long term around Alperen Şengün, who had a very fun playoff debut against Golden State in Game 1, and around, of course, Amen Thompson, who I do think is going to be the second or most important, maybe even, player for the Houston Rockets moving forward. Those two guys are really the players you're trying to build around, in my opinion, if you're Houston. And guys like Knueppel, guys like Reed Sheppard, who they already have in-house, those are the types of players that, in my opinion, are going to fit very, very well in Houston because they're decisive, quick off the catch, they toggle on and off the ball very easily, and I think specifically for the Rockets, just being better at shooting the basketball, putting the ball in the hoop, which is the name of the game in basketball, that doesn't hurt either. Moving on to pick number 10, the Portland Trailblazers, who did, unfortunately for them, lose that tiebreaker. So they are just one spot now behind Houston. But pick number 10, right, and you never know what happens with the lottery. The Blazers still could be poised to improve their roster big time here. So 10th overall, I do have them selecting forward Noah Essengue from Ratiopharm Ulm. And I kind of go back and forth quite a bit on this pick for Portland. There's a lot of different ways you can look. You can look for long-term significant massive upside. You can look for, short-term additive pieces. I think Essengue kind of fits into both of those categories here, though, for the Blazers, which is ultimately why I landed on this selection for them. Essengue is one of the better play finishers in this year's draft class and has been extremely productive in a predominantly off-ball role in Germany this season. Over the last 5 to 10 games, he's been extremely productive as a catch-and-shoot guy, and that's something that's carried weight throughout the course of his professional season there, playing next to Ben Seraph and some of the other professional talent he's alongside there for Ratiopharm Ulm. And I think specifically outside of just his catch-and-shoot game, you think about the cutting, the transition finishing. He's extremely fluid athletically, especially for a player who is as young as he is. Essengue, someone who at this point on draft night is just going to be 18 and a half years old. So basically the exact same age as Cooper Flagg nearly. And Cooper Flagg, again, reclassified a year up. So you're looking at a very young draft prospect, someone who will turn 19 in December of 2025. So he barely made the cutoff even for this 2025 draft class. And I think for Essengue specifically, fitting off of Portland, you think about, the development long-term for Scoot Henderson, what you're hoping to see more continued development from Shaedon Sharpe. Obviously, you have the playmaking hub, which is Donovan Clingan. I think Essengue does have a little bit of a road ahead of him, though, to become a very good forward in the NBA, just because I do think he's very, very light. His wingspan is not that huge, especially given his natural height and what you would kind of hope to see from a wingspan. You're thinking like +7, +8 inches if you're getting like really lucky. It's not like that. So I do think there is a lot of work to be done. I think he has to really fill out his body, specifically his base. People are going to look at his upper body and think about his arms and shoulders and how to get stronger there. But I think really the most important thing is for him to get stronger quads, stronger core, stronger, calves. I think those are things that are going to really supplement his talent right now at this point as a play finisher, make him a little bit stronger in the base, able to play through contact, have a better sense of balance. I think all of those things are going to help him a ton long term if he can get in the weight room and effectively build up his body in those ways. But nonetheless, for Portland, this is kind of an upside swing long term and someone who is at least a safe, projectable role player at the very worst. Moving forward here for the next pick in the lottery here, that is the Dallas Mavericks. My Mavericks, man. What a season that is officially over, and thank God it is. Injuries galore, Nico Harrison, fans almost burning down this team. Nico Harrison tried burning down the team first, though. So it was a crazy season. If you're a Mavs fan with me, oh my goodness, thank God we made it through the year. Thank God the season's over. Obviously, you don't like seeing your team end the year on a loss, but the season needed to end. Kyrie Irving out with an ACL. Traded for Anthony Davis, just a disaster. But they do have the 11th overall pick, and there is a prospect that is quite interesting long term, who I think the Mavericks would very heavily consider here, and that player is guard Jeremiah Fears from Oklahoma. The Mavericks, funny enough, after trading away Luka Doncic, really could use a dose of playmaking into their backcourt. Would you imagine that? With that in mind, Jeremiah Fears becomes a very intriguing option for the Mavericks due to his playmaking feel out of the pick and roll. Had some really high-level moments this year for Oklahoma as a passer and as a shot maker. Now, in past mocks, I've kind of lamented and harped on the fact that while those moments stick out big time and the highlight reel is incredibly impressive for Jeremiah Fears, we are quite a ways away from him really making those moments constants and making those moments stable and reliable and consistent, because while he did average 17 points per game this year, he was pretty ineffective in the process. Shot 43.5% from the floor, just a hair over 50% on two-pointers, and kind of an alarming 28.4% on threes without an elite three-point volume. You know, earlier I talked about VJ Edgecombe. VJ Edgecombe shot almost 1 3 more per game than Jeremiah Fears, which, looking at them as prospects, you wouldn't really assume that the way more athletic version, the way the more juiced up version of a guard in VJ Edgecombe would be shooting a pretty significant more volume of threes than Jeremiah Fears. But that's the reality of it. So while I do think Fears had some big moments, and obviously, you know, the free throw percentage, free throw rates, both really good there. Again, if you're looking at the shooting progression and indicators for that he could be a great shooter, those are things that would make some people hopeful. I do think this is kind of a big swing for Dallas, where if things work out and Jeremiah Fears becomes as good as a lot of people start to believe he can be at this point in the process, like, wow. And Fears is a younger prospect too, 18 and a half years old at the time I'm recording this. So I'm not like all out on Jeremiah Fears at this point. I'm not saying, oh, well, this is not going to warrant this high of a pick for him in the draft. But this is a risky pick, because you're projecting Fears to become a better shooter. You're projecting Fears to become a more effective play finisher. You're projecting his handle to hold up against NBA defenses. You're projecting his playmaking field to continue improving. And while that's a huge part of the draft to begin with, I think Jeremiah Fears has more work than a lot of the other prospects we've talked about at this point in terms of actually being that impact effective player. And then offensively too, when he doesn't have the ball in his hands, there's a lot of standing around. There's a lot of stationary watching. And, you know, another Oklahoma guard who kind of had that same trait to him, Trae Young. The difference between Trae Young and Jeremiah Fears, range, playmaking talent, three-point shooting success, especially in college. I mean, Trae Young was just way better than Jeremiah Fears. You know, people keep mentioning the Oklahoma guards and they, you know, obviously the comparisons to Trae Young. They are not even in the same ballpark as prospects. So I think Jeremiah Fears is a long ways to go yet. Dallas would kind of be taking him to implement him into their roster right away, especially given the fact that Kyrie Irving is out with an ACL. But I think there's risk involved, but I definitely see the upside as well for Dallas moving forward. Moving on to pick 12, the Chicago Bulls here now at this spot. Bulls fans, I hope you guys are enjoying your team. Obviously, a lot of money is going to get committed to Josh Giddey this offseason, if I had to bet. Kobe White had some really incredible moments and stretches during this past season. But the Bulls are still a team that is in a tricky spot when it comes to winning. What they need is an impact player, someone who can really help them win minutes when he's on the court. Someone who did that for a very bad team this past year was Collin Murray-Boyles out of South Carolina. I think for Chicago specifically, if you look at the uptick in pace over the last couple of years, and specifically with Josh Giddey on the court, what typically goes well with spacing and pace is decision making, and Collin Murray-Boyles is really connective as a passer. One of my favorite traits about him as a prospect. He did average 2.5 assists per game. He also averaged about 2.5 turnovers a game. But I think given the spacing context that he was playing around at South Carolina and the reliance on him to be not only a connective player but also an initiator and creator for their offense, I think going into an NBA system, playing in better spacing and a faster paced environment, he can probably cut back on those turnovers a little bit, and I think we could see an uptick in the assist per game column as well, especially the assist rate where he was at about 21.1%, which is pretty good already for his position. And then obviously you think about someone defensively too who can be in multiple spots at once and just has this really good positional knack to be in the right spot at the right time and make timely plays, be a consistent rotation defender, and really hold his end of the floor up on the defensive end. I think for Chicago, that's kind of the next step, because if you want to continue improving your pace, getting up and down the court even quicker, the more stops, the better. The more connectivity, the more gaps you can fill, the better. And Collin Murray-Boyles just feels like someone for Chicago, specifically if Vucevic shoots the ball from three as well as he did this past year. Again, for them next year, Murray-Boyles can be a really unique fit next to Matas Buzelis, next to Patrick Williams, if Bulls fans are still withholding hope there, but specifically around that backcourt of Kobe White, Josh Giddey. I think with more pacing, more space, and kind of more connectivity in the Bulls roster with Collin Murray-Boyles, Chicago, I think, is looking ahead and improving their roster quite a bit here with this pick. Moving on to pick number 13, the Atlanta Hawks here. Now, remember, this pick is top 12 protected, so the Kings very likely could miss out on this pick by just one spot. And kind of a heartbreaker for Sacramento, but it's the reality here. This is why I didn't like the Kevin Huerter trade when they made it. And now the Hawks are at a spot where they're going to get a valuable pick and a valuable player here in this draft. 13th overall, I have the Atlanta Hawks selecting center Asa Newell from Georgia. So he stays in state here, going from Athens to Atlanta. And specifically for the Hawks, when you look at Clint Capella, his expiring contract, of course, they made the change to Onyeka Okongwu as their starting center moving forward. The Hawks are extremely young, and a play finisher like Asa Newell could really help them as well. I often talk about the short roll game and how Trae Young, being the head of the snake for Atlanta, is so effective for them because they're able to get Jalen Johnson the ball from about the free throw line extended and in sometimes even on some of those 1-4 short rolls. And then with a dunker spot setter, whether that be a Okongwu or if you're projecting Asa Newell into that role, his touch, his athletic traits, and his offensive rebounding would really, I think, elevate Atlanta's offense and specifically their second chance opportunities, something Asa Newell was really elite at generating for the Bulldogs this past year, where he averaged over 3 offensive rebounds per game, and he did that in just 29 minutes per game. So you think about his per 36s, you take those up, it would be about 4 offensive rebounds per 36 minutes, which is really, really impressive. And I think for the Hawks specifically, getting on the offensive glass a little bit more, giving them another play finisher at the rim, and someone who I think as a hook shot specialist gets to either his right hook or his left hook pretty reliably. This gives Atlanta just a little bit more finishing skill and a little bit more touch than what Clint Capella at this current point in time really possessed. You think about Clint Capella, yes, he's been one of the highest volume lob finishers in his career. He's not this elite below the rim finisher, this elite touch big man. And I think Asa Newell projects to be better in that area and projects to get on the offensive glass at a rate that's going to be very beneficial for Atlanta moving forward. They already win the possessions game with how many steals Dyson Daniels gets per game. Obviously, they have a disruptive defense, something that really helped them this year. Now you give them more offensive rebounds as well. It's going to be a hard thing to overcome for teams if you lose the possession battle, both in terms of turnovers and second chance points, night in, night out versus Atlanta. Moving on to pick number 14, the San Antonio Spurs. Talk about smiling ear to ear. The Spurs should be extremely happy. Not only do they have their own pick in this draft with a chance to move up in the top 4, they now have an additional pick. While yes, it's just about a 2.5% chance that this pick specifically moves up into the top 4 in the lottery, it's still 2.5% chance they didn't have before. So if you're a Spurs fan, you should be extremely happy that the Hawks lost in the play-in. Obviously puts you in a position to have a slightly higher pick at the very worst, pick number 14. But who knows? Possibly pick 1. Maybe pick 4, somewhere in the middle between those two spots. But at 14 here in this mock draft, the San Antonio Spurs select forward Carter Bryant out of Arizona. So remember earlier we went with wing Ace Bailey, someone who has that shot-making talent. Of course, the athletic tools to be warranting a top 5, top 10 pick in the draft this year. But Carter Bryant has a lot of physical gifts as well, and in a lot of ways was way more successful as a college freshman than Ace Bailey, and he was doing it on a winning ball club there for the Arizona Wildcats. And I think specifically if you're looking at Carter Bryant, while yes, he had a terribly low usage rate, just 16%, very comparable to Khaman Maluach in that regard. And while he wasn't the most productive player, played just 19.3 minutes per game, 6.5 points per night, 4 rebounds per game, you're like, okay, well, why is this guy a lottery pick then? First of all, a lot of Spurs fans I know are going to be excited about this selection, and for good reason. He has some elite defensive metrics, nearly a 3% steal rate, nearly a 6% block rate. That really points to some of his physical athletic gifts that he has. Shot 59% as a true shooter, 59.2% on two-pointers this year, and 37.1% on threes with a gaudy 59.7% three-point attempt rate. So what does that mean? A lot of his field goal attempts came from behind the three-point line. And if you're looking for San Antonio, you don't want to jeopardize long-term three-point shooting. Of course, that's why I've talked so much about Knueppel in the draft process for San Antonio. But Carter Bryant can be a slightly lower volume three-point shooter than Knueppel. That's obviously not going to be his primary role, and it's not to the level or degree that Knueppel is as a movement shooter. But what Carter Bryant has been is a very productive stationary standstill catch and shoot guy, and he shot at a very high clip again, 37%, nearly 3 three-point attempts per game in just 19 minutes per game. Very, very productive stuff. Now, the free throw percentage wasn't great, shot sub 70% from the free throw line. Again, the usage rate's not there, but did post a net rating of 16.4 this year for Arizona. So when he was on the court, the Wildcats were a lot better than their opponent, and I think Carter Bryant specifically in that low usage, spot up, cut, fit into the dunker spot roll off of the De'Aaron Fox and Wembanyama 15 pick and roll game. This is a really, really great landing spot for Carter Bryant. This is one of the best outcomes for him specifically in the draft. And for San Antonio, it gives you three-point shooting that I believe will be reliable long-term without sacrificing physical tools, athletic traits, and all of the other gifts that Carter Bryant's going to bring on the defensive end of the floor as well. Moving on to pick number 15, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder here. This pick comes via the Miami Heat. What an outcome for Oklahoma City. This was the highest possible pick this pick could have been. It was lottery protected this year via Miami. Of course, the Heat making the playoffs this year through the play-in set this pick up to be a pick number 15, and now Oklahoma City, a team that has a very legitimate chance at winning an NBA title as soon as this season, also has a pick just outside of the lottery, and I have them here selecting guard Jase Richardson from Michigan State, someone who has been a fairly consistent lottery selection for me in the last couple of weeks of my mock drafts. Have him just outside of the lottery here at number 15 overall, and the reason for that with Jase Richardson specifically, I went with bigs in a couple of spots. I went with forwards, more athletic players for a couple of teams, specifically San Antonio, who already has, their point guard spot of the future somewhat figured out with De'Aaron Fox. And then you also look at Atlanta drafting a big man in Newell. It opened up the ability for Jase Richardson to slide a little bit here. And while Oklahoma City doesn't have a huge need anywhere on their roster, I think this is one of the BPA examples where best player available makes a ton of sense, and Jase Richardson's ability to create for himself but also play off the catch, play within an offensive role becomes really valuable for Oklahoma City, where Jase Richardson can be really effective and impactful in the non-Shai Gilgeous-Alexander minutes for Oklahoma City, and playing off of Chet Holmgren, playing off of dribble handoffs with Isaiah Hartenstein, playing off of Jalen Williams as he continues to develop as a creator offensively, but then also in the moments when none of those guys have the ball, Jase Richardson can go and get himself a shot, create for himself. We saw that usage rate tick up throughout the course of the year as his starts did as well. And I think for the Thunder specifically, do they need Jase Richardson? No. Would they love having him? Yes, and that's exactly why they go with him here. It's just a talent grab. I don't even know if Jase Richardson would play a lot of minutes. I really don't. The Thunder have not only one, but 2 first-round picks this year as well now. So they have the real possibility of dominating the draft after possibly winning the title or at least winning the Western Conference. This is such a great scenario for Oklahoma City. So if you're a Thunder fan, you just have to be stoked at this point of the draft cycle. Moving on here now to pick number 16, I have the Orlando Magic here at this spot of the draft. And with Orlando specifically, they have a type. Orlando typically looks for the sizey playmaking, can handle the ball a little bit, can create for themselves, create for others a little bit. You think about some of the recent picks, Tristan da Silva out of Colorado. Obviously, Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner kind of fit that stereotype too. 16th overall, I do have the Orlando Magic following that blueprint that they believe in internally and drafting forward/guard Egor Demin from BYU. Earlier in the process, everyone was projecting Egor Demin to be this top 5 value point guard who is a jumbo playmaker. And, you start to envision these things that, like, the next Luka, not that anyone was really saying that, but that's the kind of player I think people were starting to become optimistic that Egor Demin was. And then obviously got into Big 12 play, struggled quite a bit, and there's a lot of reasons why. I'm a bit lower myself on Egor Demin. He is very contact averse. He's not going to play into traffic. He's not going to play into physicality very well at all. I talked about some of those things with Noah Essengue. I think it's even more alarming for Egor Demin. It shows up in his pretty poor free throw rate. It shows up in his lack of efficiency, both from a true shooting standpoint because of the lack of free throws, but also his field goal percentage, the reliance on three-point volume. And at this point of his development, he's not been an elite three-point shooter at all. So I think for Orlando specifically, this is a reach. It's not a pick that I would make, but that's the point of these mock drafts. It's not projecting who I would take. It's not saying this is what I would do. This is projecting what teams will do. And the Magic need more playmaking. They do tend to like positional size a ton. You think about that with Anthony Black, another example of that. Could they look at Egor Demin and say, at 16th overall, we feel like there's so much upside here to unlock that if we draft him, it could be a huge home run for us? I definitely feel like they could look at it that way. So even though I would not recommend this pick at all for Orlando, I do think there's so many red flags defensively. Even if you do envision him being a point guard, who does he guard? Is he quick enough to guard other point guards? Probably not, which means you need someone else to be your primary point of attack defender. And while the Magic obviously do have Jalen Suggs, they already have some pieces in place that could be really good in that kind of role. Does Egor Demin really accentuate that talent a ton and bring the best out of that talent offensively? I don't really think so. But again, it's not what I would do. It's projecting what NBA teams will do. And I do think Orlando, with the way that they have drafted over the last 4 or 5 years, this is the type of player they would look at and very likely select 16th overall. Moving on to pick number 17, we have the Minnesota Timberwolves, a team that is all in on Anthony Edwards moving forward. And with that in mind, you need to draft, anytime you're talking about the Timberwolves, you need to draft in a way that's going to accentuate him and best fit his offense moving forward. So 17th overall, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves selecting forward Rasheer Fleming out of St. Joseph's, one of the most sought-after players in this draft. I think a ton of NBA fans want to see Rasheer Fleming on their favorite team. And for Minnesota specifically, this would be a very, very good get. This gives them a player who can be a point of attack / team, huge, big-time team defender when Jaden McDaniels is off the court. It also provides a lot more length, size, and play finishing into their lineup. Specifically, what Rasheer Fleming did a ton of this past year for St. Joe's was play off the ball and thrive as a cutter, a diver to the hoop, someone who could stand still and knock down a catch-and-shoot jump shot. And I think for Minnesota specifically, not only are they at risk of losing 2 big-time off-the-bench contributors this offseason, Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. We'll see what Minnesota does. It's possible they could find a way to keep both of them, although that will be a challenge. The Timberwolves are going to be looking for 3-and-D type of players. Rasheer Fleming is one who projects to be very, very good in that role. Knocked down a ton of his threes at the college game this past year. Now, he can't really drive the basketball. There's not a lot of upside in this pick at all. But when you're looking at team winning and building the best team around Anthony Edwards, Rasheer Fleming's tools, traits, and skills that he currently possesses checks a lot of the boxes I think Minnesota would be looking for, not only into their team defense, but also into their team offense around Anthony Edwards, who continues to grow as a playmaker, and specifically with the way that they want to play, very, very oriented around Anthony Edwards having the ball, channeling and drawing double teams in order to create open looks off of either swing series passes or just with Anthony Edwards kicking the ball out to the open shooter himself. Moving on to pick number 18, the Washington Wizards. This pick was part of the tiebreakers earlier on Monday and locked in at pick number 18 now, as the Grizzlies technically won the tiebreaker, giving the Wizards the 18th pick in this year's draft. And with this selection, the Washington Wizards, after going with Derik Queen in the lottery at 18 now, they come and draft wing Noah Penda from Lamont, playing LNB Pro A basketball, and has been really, really, really effective, especially defensively, where in isolation he has been a shutdown defender this season. And I think in a lot of different ways has been really, really effective as a team defender where his screen navigation, his gap help, his ability to be a rotation man, help get stops in transition, just make a ton of timely plays defensively. This is the type of pick for Washington where we already have a lot of the core infrastructure in place moving forward now. Alex Sarr, obviously, we talked about Derik Queen, what that fit could look like in their front court. You also imagine, the development long-term of Bub Carrington. Noah Penda is someone who checks a lot of the boxes that those other guys typically don't, or technically don't. With Bilal Coulibaly already being such a good gap defender and a defensive playmaker for them at times, I think Noah Penda can be their on-ball, sit-down and guard kind of guy who keeps the ball in front of his chest, mirrors the movement skills of perimeter players very, very well. And I think developmentally, if you're betting on him, it's really a defense-first bet. And I think for Washington, who already has such a unique team defensive construct in place, Noah Penda can be one of the nice, kind of finishing touches for that team defense moving forward, whereas Derik Queen was your offensive bet, your size bet for them, rebounding, getting in transition more, winning that kind of battle. If the Wizards can build this really strong team defense that rebounds the ball well, pushes in transition, you have two unique big men who can handle the ball, put the ball on the deck, and score for themselves and create for others. The Wizards could have this really fun, unique team kind of synergy and team context that's going to be tough to match up with and really tough to guard night in, night out. Moving on to pick number 19 now, the Brooklyn Nets here on the clock via the Milwaukee Bucks. This pick was decided by that tiebreaker at number 19. And for the Nets specifically here, after earlier in this draft going with Kasparas Jakucionis at pick number 8, the Nets here at 19 will select forward Liam McNeely out of UConn. And I alluded to this pick earlier when I talked about how the Nets have the ability to draft players who can fit and thrive off of a Kasparas Jakucionis. Liam McNeely is someone who does come to mind to fit that. Now, he did not have the most productive freshman season by any stretch of the imagination for UConn. In fact, struggled in a lot of ways, even in ways that I don't think a lot of people were expecting. The three-point shot didn't hit consistently, but there were things he did very well. He rebounded the ball for his position respectably. The defense is a huge question at this point, but I think for Brooklyn specifically, what are you projecting him to be best at for you? And it is shooting the basketball. So you might say, well, why would you draft a guy in the top 20 to shoot the ball well if he didn't shoot the ball that well? And, I sound like Billy Beane a little bit here from Moneyball, but the reason for that specifically was the absence of a playmaker, and I'm talking like a 1A true, real playmaker for UConn this past year. UConn was filled with quality players who I thought could really finish plays well for them. Solo Ball, Liam McNeely, Alex Karaban, those are the first names that really come to mind when you think of that and what that looked like for UConn this past year. But what they didn't have was the Tristan Newton, the Donovan Kling, and the Stephon Castle, hey, this is the guy who can either enact downhill presence or be a playmaking hub for your offense. And I thought that really hurt the UConn draft prospects this year, specifically Liam McNeely, because his role at Montverde Academy off of Cooper Flagg was a spot-up, slight movement shooter who could be a zone breaker and someone who just made a lot of his three-point shots because of the gravity and downhill playmaking that Cooper Flagg had. And playing off of Derik Queen, playing off of the other pieces there that Montverde Academy had around him. And I think for Brooklyn specifically, if you have Jakucionis, someone who does a very good job generating paint touches, drawing a ton of attention, the way he comes off of pick and rolls, the way he comes off of dribble handoffs, he does really draw that attention and specifically forces the big man to engage with him. He does a good job engaging bigs and drop coverage. And I think Liam McNeely as a floor stretcher spacer fits into Brooklyn's offense very well. They found a lot of success this year with guys like Cam Johnson, obviously having a career year. Dorian Finney-Smith earlier in the season was having a career year shooting the ball for them. So I think Liam McNeely is a pretty safe bet. Now with Kasparas Jakucionis in that net system as a huge upside get for them when it comes to reverting back to the mean as a great shooter like he was in high school. Moving on to pick number 20, the Miami Heat here now. Unfortunately for them, this pick dropped to number 20 through that three-way tiebreaker with the Nets pick via Milwaukee and the pick at number 18 too. So Miami here now at pick number 20. This is where they're at on draft night. And 20th overall, I have them here via the Warriors selecting guard Ben Seraph out of Ratiopharm Ulm. Earlier, a couple weeks ago, we've been talking about the Heat with possibly two lottery picks, projecting, or two top 20, top 25-ish picks, given the fact that they were projected to keep their pick before they made the playoffs through the play-in. Now that they are a playoff team, they only have one pick, which means instead of grabbing a creator in the lottery and then maybe a wing defender or someone who has some athletic tools at pick 20, they have to grab someone who I think can create offense for them and be an initiator for perimeter offense going forward. And that player for me here at 20 was Ben Saraf. Go back to his FIBA U18 tape where he dominated for Israel, was really, really challenging for a ton of younger players to guard. Manipulated the pick and roll extremely well. One of my favorite things about him as a draft prospect is watching him weaponize the weak side of the court as he draws in tag man, low man help in the pick and roll game, gets to spots on the floor where he can effectively score the ball. I think there's enough shooting projection here for me to feel very comfortable about his three-point shot. I know that seems to be a holdup for a lot of other people at this point in time. I think Ben Saraf's going to be a good player. I think he's going to have enough creation offensively to be a very dangerous offensive player at times, and I think specifically playing off of Bam Adebayo and the opposite-handedness of each other here, Bam Adebayo being a righty, Ben Saraf being a lefty, I think they can naturally work off of each other very well, where Adebayo's triggering the dribble handoffs to his right hand, Saraf's coming at it toward his left hand. I think from there you find this unique game where they can play with each other in the pocket. They can play off of handoffs. Saraf can be a creator. Saraf can also back cut some of those. Adebayo obviously has the passing talent to do that. I think this is a very strong fit for Miami and one that gives them more offensive creation, which I think at this point they really badly do need moving forward. Moving on to pick number 21, the Utah Jazz here now. At this spot, remember they went with Trey Johnson earlier in the draft at pick number 5. Now 21st overall, I have them here selecting forward Hugo Gonzalez from Spain. And this is another upside long-term project pick, but someone who flashes a ton of skills and tools that I think could be quite beneficial in the NBA game. I've talked at length in this mock draft about the value of spacing and pacing and how that can make the game easier for guys who see the floor well and understand how to move the basketball and when to pass the basketball. And I think Hugo Gonzalez is someone who is a very unselfish player, can play within the constraints of a team if you want him to, but can also make that next play and can kind of take on that challenge a bit himself. This is a huge upside grab for Utah because of his ability to also knock down perimeter shots, something I think there's more and more potential with. I think this year was a real prove-it year for him when it came to shooting the ball, and I think there's a lot of growth and a lot of trust we've seen this year. I think teams are going to feel really good and really comfortable about his shooting projection moving forward based on the season he's had this year where he shot it pretty confidently. And then specifically, when it comes to attacking the basket, he does move rather fluid for his size and length. And then when it comes to his ability to get to the rim and then play make off of that, you're looking at a guy who I think can be really connective into Utah's overall team context, specifically now that we give them Trey Johnson, someone who can stretch the floor really well for them. They obviously have Lauri Markkanen, who's already a great play finisher. They have John Collins, another guy who's a very good play finisher. Hugo Gonzalez, someone who can do a little bit of everything, cut, play, finish from that aspect, catch and shoot the basketball, but can also put the ball on the deck a bit for himself, create for others as a facilitator, whether that be, hey, make the next pass, swing the basketball, or, hey, attack a closeout, put the ball on the deck, get a paint touch, and then drive and kick that ball out somewhere else. I think this fits quite well for Utah long-term, given their collection of pieces already on the roster, including Trey Johnson, who we picked at 5 for them. Moving on to pick number 22, the Atlanta Hawks here now. Remember, earlier in this draft, they went with Asa Newell out of Georgia. Now at number 22, the Hawks have the ability to add something they really drastically need, and that is another ball handler who can create out of the pick and roll. That player here is Nolan Traore from France. And remember, going back to last draft cycle, we kind of thought this is a player who could very well be a top 5 pick in the 2025 draft. He has not had the season to back that up, shooting sub 30% from 3. His true shooting percentage is absolutely in the garbage. And you might be saying, if you're a Hawks fan, then why are you mocking us, this guy? The reason is this guy can pass the ball and he has very good burst and feel and understanding of how teams defend pick and roll play. And I talked earlier in this video about how Trae Young and Jalen Johnson are such a dynamic combination. I think Nolan Traore, his pocket passing ability, his ability to pass the ball, specifically on bounce passes and using a variety of angles to get the ball into the middle of the floor, could really accentuate Jalen Johnson's emergence as a star player in the NBA. And I think for the Hawks specifically, if Trae Young is out, who are you going to try and channel your offense through? It's Jalen Johnson, especially if you have Asa Newell now. The value of getting Jalen Johnson the ball in the middle of the court with either shooters or finishers around him, that's extremely valuable. And I think for the Hawks specifically, we're looking for another guy who can reliably initiate some of that offense. While yes, they do have Vit Krejci, they do have Dyson Daniels, I think Nolan Traore offensively would be worth that upside bet if you draft him 22nd overall. He's coming off a year of professional development, playing in a professional basketball league that is way more challenging than college basketball. I think this is the type of pick for Atlanta specifically where, yes, the returns this year for Traore as a draft prospect haven't been great, but you're not drafting him for what he's done. You're drafting him for what you're hoping he can become, which is a very good short roll pocket passer and someone who can handle the ball in the pick and roll when Trae Young is out of the game. Pick number 23, the Indiana Pacers here now. Indiana specifically, a team that not only do I think they have a shot at going deep in this year's playoffs, but I love their long-term collection of pieces moving forward. I think that they have the flexibility to make one more big trade if they want to moving forward, or continue to allow this team to grow, develop together, build together. When you have Tyrese Halliburton, who is at the core heart of this team's offensive system, you're going to be good. And I think for Indiana specifically, 23rd overall, selecting here center/forward Danny Wolf out of Michigan makes a ton of sense. One thing that we saw this year from Halliburton that has been completely under discussed in national media has been the real downtick in his volume of ball handling and how often he's playing on the basketball. And he's been more adept moving off the ball and doing a few other things in that way. So I think for Indiana specifically, with Miles Turner as an unrestricted free agent this offseason, not only is Danny Wolf a little bit of insurance in case something happens there, but in the minutes that Miles Turner's off the court, I think Danny Wolf could be a fun offensive initiator for them, someone who can handle the ball, put the ball on the deck a bit, create a little bit. Now, the Sabonis-Miles Turner pairing together didn't work super great. For that reason, I would not plan on Danny Wolf and Miles Turner sharing the floor together a ton. But what I do think is if Danny Wolf is on the floor with Halliburton, you can trigger into dribble handoffs really easily. You can run a lot of short roll action where Danny Wolf's your screener for Halliburton. Halliburton can get him the ball around the nail, and from there Wolf can make some more reads out of his handle and off the dribble. Now, Wolf has a lot of ways to go in terms of his development. I think, at this point in time, as a slightly older college basketball prospect, he's not really that old. He'll be 21 years old at the draft, so it's not like he's ancient or anything. But I think for Danny Wolf specifically, there is still quite a bit of development needed. His handle's not at a spot where I trust it in the NBA, specifically if he's going to get guarded by smaller, quicker players. They're going to crowd him. They're going to try and make him uncomfortable on the perimeter. So I think Danny Wolf, a fun pick here, not one that is an absolute home run slam dunk immediately for Indiana, but one that I definitely think could help benefit their recent offensive changes from a year ago to where they're at this year, where having Halliburton off the ball a bit with another guy like Danny Wolf can be beneficial for them even to a greater degree than it already currently is. Moving on to pick number 24, the Oklahoma City Thunder once again on the clock. Remember, they had pick 15 in this draft, drafted Jase Richardson in this mock. And at number 24 here, I have them selecting wing Adu Thiero from Arkansas. And this is the wave the white flag moment for every other NBA GM in this mock draft, because Adu Thiero is a player that I really, really love, and I would really love for him to land in Oklahoma City, because this team, the way that they play, their offensive spacing, the passing from Isaiah Hartenstein off the top of the key around the nail, Adu Thiero's ability to cut, finish, and his functional athleticism would be unbelievably good in Oklahoma City. He shot an incredible percent from the field this year, specifically from inside the 2-point line, where he had a 60.5% true shooting percentage, shot 60.5% from on all 2-pointers this year. And while, yes, he only did shoot 25.5% from three as a junior, a true junior prospect with a very low 17% three-point attempt rate, his free throw rate was through the roof. 69.2% free throw rate. Nice. Really unbelievable. And he got on the offensive glass. Almost 2 offensive rebounds per game as a wing. and his physical tools show up on defense, where he's a gap helper, someone who can really make a lot of plays off the basketball, and he's strong on the ball as well. He's a very, very gifted athlete, and I think for Oklahoma City, while the rich get richer and they don't really have a role or minutes for him right now, this guy learning from Lu Dort, this guy developing in Oklahoma City's team context where they've done a very good job helping non-shooters at least grow as shooters. Josh Giddey, each year of his career, got just a little bit more comfortable, a little bit better as a three-point shooter before they traded him. Lu Dort has improved tremendously as a three-point shooter. You think about the production and volume increase for Chet Holmgren. Like, Oklahoma City knows what they're doing developmentally, obviously, and I think a Thiero would be such a home run pick for them. If they walk out of this draft with Jase Richardson and a Thiero, oh my goodness, what a home run for Oklahoma City. Pick number 25, the Orlando Magic, who went with Egor Demin at number 16 out of BYU. The Magic with 2 first-round picks here. What I would really love for them to do is package these picks together in a trade to add some serious offensive creation talent and shooting, especially out of the backcourt. But assuming they don't do that, 25th overall, I have them here selecting wing Will Riley from Illinois. Again, projecting what the Magic look to do, I don't think they're going to take some smaller guard. I think that they're going to look at creation bets who don't really jeopardize their team defense much. And Will Riley, while his minutes did vary up and down quite a bit this year for the Fighting Illini, what he is long-term is a very projectable shooter, someone who lives and dies on the pull-up three-point shot, which does point to some real star talent potential, because you think about the kinds of shots you generate against drop coverage, you think about the kinds of shots you generate in transition and early offensive opportunities. A lot of them are pull-up jump shots, and Will Riley likes to shoot a lot of pull-up jump shots. And I think for Orlando specifically, while yes, you have Jet Howard, while yes, we just drafted Egor Demin, while yes, you have Tristan da Silva, this just kind of feels like the vibe for the Magic. Now, I did want to look at a center for them, but I do think long-term just keeping Wendell Carter Jr. and Goga Bitadze is definitely still a possibility. Trading Wendell Carter, I wouldn't be mad at the idea, and then if you want to draft a center here at 25, someone like Joan Behringer, for example, or maybe Alex Condon, those are some potential options to consider, right, too. So I think this pick at 25 is very malleable. You can look a variety of different ways. But I really wanted to value shot creation in this mock draft, which is why we went with a playmaker in Egor Demin at number 16. And we went with Will Riley here as a wing shot creator for them at number 25. Moving on to number 26, we have the Brooklyn Nets here with back-to-back selections. And for Brooklyn specifically, a team that is in the midst of kind of adding more young talent with Jakucionis and Liam McNeely. They also want to improve their team potentially this offseason. They're lined up for max cap space. And I think given the fact that they have 4 first-round picks, not every single pick needs to be a long-term upside swing. You can also look at guys who are very projectable, safe bets for this roster. 26th overall, I have them selecting forward Alex Karaban out of UConn. So we went with one UConn wing in Liam McNeely. We're going with another one here in Alex Karaban. And for all the reasons I talked about with Liam McNeely and how his struggles kind of resulted from an absence of real, true, high-quality playmaking talent for UConn, I think Alex Karaban was really negatively impacted as well. You look at his efficiency numbers from where they were at the first 2 years of his college career, where he was busy winning not 1 but 2 national championships, to where he was as a junior. And yes, I mean, like, there is definitely fair criticism to some of the concerns, right? Like the assist rate, not very gaudy for Alex Karaban. The block rate, pretty good though, 5%. Steal rate, a little bit low, 1%. That kind of points to some of the physical limitations, I think, laterally and from a mobility standpoint for Alex Karaban. But what he does do is value the basketball, had a 2.1 assist to turnover rate this year. And in 36 minutes, while he only did average 14 points per game, he shot the ball, I think, respectably. 54% from 2, about 35% from 3. And again, that was without a primary creator. So I think for Brooklyn specifically, how do these players project next to Kasparas Jakucionis, next to other key long-term pieces for Brooklyn, depending on whoever they spend money on in the offseason? The Nets, I think, getting some young talent and specifically guys who can stretch the floor space and fill positional needs as well when it comes to team defense. I think Karaban's someone who has great positional IQ defensively. This is a winning player and someone who's going to have really, really great long-term impact in the NBA moving forward. A very safe bet, in my opinion, to have a 8 to 10 year NBA career at the very least. Pick number 27, staying on the topic of the Brooklyn Nets, here's the pick via the Houston Rockets. And after going with Kasparas, Jakucionis, and Liam McNeely and Alex Karaban, I have them also here going with center Alex Condon from Florida. And how many times have we talked about dribble handoffs and playing out of delay action for the Nets in this mock draft? Quite a bit. Well, let's get a player who makes sense to fit into that too. Alex Condon, someone who triggered into a ton of dribble handoffs for the Florida Gators this year, who won the national title, by the way, in college basketball. This pick, I think, just makes a lot of sense. We're looking for someone who can be a positive, impactful contributor. Who knows what will happen with Nick Claxton? Who knows what's going to happen with Cam Johnson? They could trade one, maybe both of those guys, which would open a ton of minutes for McNeely and Karaban. It would also open up minutes for Condon here with Day'Ron Sharpe already in the mix and Noah Clowney. Condon's a very smart player, smart passer, understands how to utilize his body specifically as a screener while he has the ball. And I think even though that's not something you're going to hear from anyone else and it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, when you watched Florida play this year, you saw it in action and you saw how beneficial it was for his teammates, creating a little bit of extra space and time. And that's really all basketball is. The more space and time you have on offense, the better, the easier offense becomes, and the more pressure it puts on defenses to react earlier, to rotate early, and to open up other things for your team offensively, whether that be cross-court kicks or kickouts on the strong side, whatever that might end up looking like. Alex Condon helps generate a lot of good stuff offensively, and he's an extremely coordinated big man with good hands, catches the ball well, rebounds the ball respectably well. I think for Brooklyn specifically here, walking out of the draft with a couple of college freshmen, a couple of non-college freshmen, when it comes to Jakucionis and McNeely being your freshman, and then non-freshmen in Karaban and Condon, I feel like if you're a Nets fan, you got to be pretty happy with that overall haul, assuming they don't make trades in and out of the first round this year. Pick number 28, the Boston Celtics here now, a team that I still think is a real threat to win it all this postseason. With the three-point volume, the success rate there, the Celtics got to feel really good about themselves. But long-term, one of the questions I have for this new ownership is how committed are they to paying this entire payroll? And specifically, how do they look at the guard position long-term? One of the biggest successes that the Celtics have on their current roster setup is the switchability of their guards. Jrue Holiday can guard up the lineup a ton. Derek White can guard up and down the lineup a lot. Obviously, they have just two of the best guard defenders in the league. Derek White, one of the best shot-blocking guards in recent NBA history. Jrue Holiday, extremely strong, really strong hands and very good core strength. I think for Boston specifically, if you're looking to replace, especially Jrue Holiday as he ages, you're going to need someone who right now already projects to have really smart defensive IQ and tools, but someone who offensively you're going to bet long-term on the three-point shot, and that player here is LeBaron Philon. I think Philon specifically is a guy that I could see them betting on and banking on and hoping that his progression as a shooter is legitimate. Shot about 31% from three this past year for Alabama, and the shot really came and went for him. There would be stretches where he's shooting the ball really well, some stretches where he's not shooting the ball well at all, and I think the lack of consistency really does point to a lack of skill. The most skilled players are the most consistent players typically. So LeBaron Philon, while the consistency wasn't there, it's, I think, an early indicator that the skill set's not there as a shooter. But it doesn't mean he can't get there. It's just going to take some time. And that's what Boston right now has for their young players. They have nothing but time because they have their top 7, top 8 of their rotation very well set in stone. So any draft pick here in the back end of the first round for Boston is going to be a draft and develop, draft and stash, and hope this guy can really progress in some of his swing skill areas. And I think for LeBaron Philon specifically, he has very good defensive playmaking intelligence at this point, knows how to get his hands on the basketball and be disruptive. That's going to be a benefit for Boston long term if they draft him. But specifically what they're hoping for here is shooting progression, and they need a lot of it for him to fit really well into their team context. Otherwise, he becomes somewhat forgettable for them. But I do think nonetheless that the Celtics here at 28 would feel good about LeBaron Philon as a draft and develop player at this point in the first round. Moving on to pick number 29, the Phoenix Suns here now. This pick via the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I think for Phoenix specifically, there's so many ways we can look. Do we want to go draft and find a young player who can fit them? Do we want to, and kind of more of a long-term projection? Do we want to go with an upperclassman? In recent mock drafts, I've been going with someone like Nick Clifford out of Colorado State, who's an older draft prospect who would project to have a pretty prominent role in the team immediately. I do think that fits Phoenix's overall draft history recently. But I think given the fact that there is a Kevin Durant trade looming this offseason, the Suns could also look and say, how do we fix this problem long-term? And after making some kind of trade to either bring in draft picks or win now players for Phoenix, I think the best thing for them to do is look at a long-term developmental standpoint. And 29th overall, I have them drafting forward Thomas Sorber from Georgetown, someone who, listen, he shot the ball really, really poorly from three this past year, 16% only on threes, but projects to be a very fun, unique defensive player. And I think fitting him next to Ryan Dunn, where Dunn was an absolutely dominant college defender, Sorber can bring some of that as well. Averaged over 2 blocks per game for Georgetown this past year, before ultimately having his season cut short for the Hoyas, but a 7.6% block rate, which was really gaudy, 1.5 steals per game as well, and did average about 14.5 points per game. So he was productive in your traditional box score numbers extremely well. Shot about 60% on twos this year. Again, the 3-point rate and success is not very high. But for those, again, who believe in that free throw rate and believe in free throw percentage, had a 42% free throw rate, which is quite good, and shot 72.4% from the actual stripe this year. Pretty respectable rebounding numbers. Not an incredibly high usage, but a very good team defensive rating when he was on the floor. So I think Thomas Sorber, when it comes to a projection long-term for what he could bring to Phoenix, this is the type of fit and player that I think could work out quite well with the Suns long-term, depending on what the return is for Durant. I think the Suns right now, basically the biggest thing for them is a question mark. We don't know what this team's really going to look like. We don't know what draft picks they're going to have. We don't know anything really about their future until a Durant trade is done. So right now, honestly, every single mock draft, this pick feels like the hardest one to project because it's really an open-ended question. What are the Suns going to have? Is Devin Booker going to ask out? Will he be there? I'm pretty much projecting him to be there at this point, but I really don't know. I think everything's a huge toss-up. But the Phoenix Suns here, number 29, I have going with Thomas Sorber in this mock draft. Now at pick number 30, I have the Los Angeles Clippers here selecting center John Broome from Auburn. I'm not even going to waste any time here. We're going to jump into John Broome and why I think for the Clippers specifically. First of all, welcome to the first round of the mock draft here, Broome. And the reason why I went with John Broome in this specific mock draft for the Clippers, the value that Ivica Zubac has brought to the Clippers has been immense. He should be an all-defense first-team player this year and should be an all-NBA third-team candidate as well. He's been that good. But one thing the Clippers have really missed behind him since deciding to pay John Wall instead of Isaiah Hartenstein has been a high-quality, high-caliber backup center. And with that in mind, now that Isaiah Hartenstein is such a core piece of the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Clippers need someone who can contribute. They've tried. They drafted Fianu Kabanyele. They drafted Daniel Aturu. Those haven't panned out at all. Then they went out and traded for Drew Eubanks. I mean, they've made so many moves, right? Mason Plumlee. The backup center spot has been a revolving door for the Clippers, and I think this is a chance for them to get someone who, yes, the ceiling is not super high, but he plays out of the pocket well. He's got good touch. He's a solid, respectable playmaker, and he can be a good screen setter. And I think John Broome, while yes, he would be scaling down very significantly from his role at Auburn, is a really safe, albeit low ceiling, respectably high floor pick for the Clippers at number 30. You can argue he doesn't warrant a true first-round pick. I understand, but it's also the last pick of the first round here, and it really, really badly addresses a fit for them. And he's a win-now player, so if you're trying to milk out every last ounce of James Harden and Kawhi Leonard at this point of the process, John Broome is a guy who I do think could make some legitimate sense for them at pick number 30. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. Really had a lot of fun with this mock draft with lottery simulation via Tankathon. Thanks again so much, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.